The first champion was already mid-lunge when I understood we had made a mistake. I had run the culling pit at Varsk Hold for 31 cycles, and I had seen 10,000 recruits stand where the humans stood now, on the bleached sand under the cold blue arc lamps, with the kill lane open in front of them and the tiered gallery of officers above. I had watched most of them die there, or break in refuse, or freeze until the beast took the choice from their hands. None of that prepared me for the small thing on the sand. Her name on the roster was Mara Quell. She was a head shorter than our smallest cadet, soft-faced plain, with cropped dark hair and a borrowed training tunic 2 sizes too large, and she stood with her weight loose and her hands open at her sides as Hosk, first of the 12, 300 kilos of armored thresh warrior, our finest blooded champion, came across the lane to end her. I have a duty to record these things truthfully. So I will record that Mara Quell did not move the way prey moves. She did not flinch back, did not throw up her arms, did not make the high, keening sound the young ones make when the realness of it lands. She turned a quarter step, the way you turn to let someone pass in a corridor, put 2 fingers against the inside of Hosk's wrist as the blow came down, and let his own weight carry 300 kilos of him past her and into the sand. The crack of his chest plate hitting the floor went up through the gallery like a dropped bell. Then she was standing again, hands open, looking mildly at the second champion, and the gallery had gone very quiet. I want to be clear about what Hosk is, because the rest of this only matters if you understand it. The 12 are not cadets. The 12 are the hold-standing champions, hand raised from the blood pens, each one taller than a human by a full body and armored in living chitin plate that grows thicker every season. Survive. Hosk had killed in the pit 41 times. He had broken the spine of a Drekken envoy across his knee in front of the whole Concord and been given a citation for it. When the provost wanted to make an example of a recruit, when she wanted the gallery to understand, in the most permanent way, that humans did not belong in a war academy and should not have been admitted under the Concord's new equal intake mandate, she did not send a cadet. She sent Hosk and the other 11, all of them, into the lane at once, against one unarmed human girl, and she sat back in the high seat with her claws laced and waited to be proven right. I was the proctor of record. I had logged the match parameters myself. 12-1, no weapons issued to the human, full contact, no yield horn. On the forum it is called an unsurvivable demonstration. We do not run them often. We had never run one against someone who looked back up at the gallery with the polite, slightly bored patience of a person waiting for a slow lift. The second champion was Vol, leaner than Hosk, faster, and Vol had learned from watching the first fall. He did not lunge, he came in low and wide, herding her toward the wall where 2 of the others were already moving to cut the angle. It was good pitcraft. I had taught some of it myself. Mara Quell watched all 3 of them the way you watch traffic before you cross a road, and when the trap closed, she was not in it. She had stepped not back but forward, inside Vol's reach where his long arms could not bring force to bear, and she did something to his knee with the edge of her boot that folded a champion of Varsk. Hold onto the sand, making a sound I had never heard one of them make. Easy, I heard her say to him, quietly. Not a taunt, the way you'd speak to something that had hurt itself. Stay down. You'll tear it worse. Vol stayed down. Up in the gallery, the provost had leaned forward. I could see the line of her jaw from the proctor's box, the plates of it tightening. Beside me, my under-proctor, a young thresh named Erin who had never run a demonstration before, had stopped breathing through his gills in the way they do when the world stopped matching the briefing. Proctor Dre, Erin said. That's 2. I can count, I told him. I could count. I had counted 10,000 recruits into that pit, and I had never once miscounted the direction the fear ran. The fear in a culling pit runs one way, from the sand to the gallery. The thing on the sand is afraid. The things in the seats are safe. That is the whole architecture of the place. It is built out of stone and lamplight to make exactly that feeling, and in 31 cycles I had never felt it run the other way. It was running the other way now. I felt it move through the proctor's box like a draft under a door. Erin felt it. The 3rd and 4th champions, circling, felt it. I watched it reach them, watched the rhythm of their circling change. The small loss of commitment that a predator's body makes when its certainty is cracked. They were still going to attack. They were ordered to, and they were proud, and 3 of their number were on the sand. But somewhere underneath the orders and the pride, the oldest part of them had taken a reading off the small, calm human and did not like the answer. She had not raised her voice. She had not raised her hands above her own shoulders. She had said easy to a champion she'd just dropped, and the gallery of Varsk Hold, the cruelest room I know, had gone silent listening for what she would say next. The provost stood. I knew that posture. It meant she had decided the demonstration was not going the way the form promised, and that she was about to change the parameters mid-match, which is against every rule of the pit, and which she had the authority to do anyway. She lifted one claw toward the heavy doors at the far end of the lane, the deep doors, the ones we do not open for cadets, and I understood, a half second before the bolts began to draw, what she was going to do. There is one thing in Varsk hold more feared than the 12. We keep it below the pit, in the dark, in a cell carved out of the old rock before the hold was a hold. We feed it through a chute. No handler has touched it in 9 years and lived to be asked about it. In the logs it has a designation, a string of glyphs that means nothing. But the cadets call it the underfloor, and the champions. The champions will not say its name at all. It is the thing we threaten the 12 with when the 12 grow proud. It is an apex of a kind we do not breed anymore because we could never make it obey. The provost was going to put one unarmed human girl in the lane with it, on a citation form that already read unsurvivable, so that whatever happened next could be written down as an accident and not a defeat. Provost, I said into the box channel, because it was my duty to say it, and because I am a coward who needed the record to show I had said it. The underfloor is not a sanctioned match asset. I can't certify, then don't certify it, Dre. Her voice came back flat and amused over the channel, the way it always did when she had decided something cruel and wanted you to know your objection had been noted and shelved. Certify what's left. The bolts drew. The deep doors began to grind apart. And on the sand, the small human turned away from the 4 champions still circling her, turned her back on them, which no one in the history of the pit has ever done and lived, and faced the opening dark with her hands still loose and open at her sides, as if she had been waiting all along for the only thing in the building worth meeting. I should describe the gallery, because the gallery is half the cruelty and you cannot understand Varsk hold without it. The pit at Varsk is round and deep and old, a bowl of bleached stone sunk into the rock with tiered seating ringing it like the inside of a throat, and the cold blue arc lamps hang on long arms from the ceiling so that there are no shadows on the sand and nowhere to hide and no way for the thing being demonstrated to be anything but seen. The officers sit in their tiers in order of rank, the lowest at the rim and the high seats up under the lamps, and the provost's seat is highest of all, with the heavy doors of the deep cell directly across the lane from it, so that she can look down the throat of the place and see everything she owns. It is built to make one feeling, and it makes it well. I had sat in the proctor's box at the lane's edge for 31 cycles, and I had grown so used to the feeling that I no longer felt it, the way you stop smelling the rendering yards after a season downwind. It took a small human standing on the sand and not being afraid for me to feel my own pit again, and what I felt, watching her, was that I had spent my whole life inside a machine for making creatures afraid and had called it a school. That is a thing a proctor is not supposed to think, and I thought it between the fall of the first champion and the fall of the third, and I have not been able to stop thinking it since. The order had come down the day before. The provost had called me to her tier room and told me the human in the combat track was to be given a demonstration, full parameters. And when I had said the human was an intake of 40 days with no blooding and asked which cadet she would be matched against, the provost had laughed her dry, amused laugh and said, all of them, all of the 12. I had thought then that she meant it as a figure of speech, a way of saying the matching would be hard. She did not mean it as a figure of speech. She had it written on the form when I came in the next morning, in her own claw, 12 against 1, no weapons, no yield horn, and she had signed it, and she had handed it to me to sign as proctor of record, and I had signed it. I want that in the record. I signed it. I told myself the human would refuse the lane, as cadets sometimes do, and take the discipline mark for refusal, and live. I told myself a great many things while I signed my name to a murder, and not one of them was the truth, which was that I was afraid of the provost and I signed because she told me to. The same as every other creature in that hold, had done every cruel thing it had ever done. So when Mara Quell walked out onto the sand instead of refusing, when she came through the cadet doors in her too large tunic and looked once around, the bowl of the pit and the tiers of officers and the cold lamps calmly, taking the measure of it, and then walked to the center of the lane and stood with her hands open and waited. I felt the first cold finger of the thing that was going to happen. She had not come to refuse. She had not come to die either. She had come the way you come to a thing you have decided to walk through, and I had never in 31 cycles seen a recruit wear that particular calm, and it frightened me more than any roar from the deep doors ever had. She doesn't know what the 12 are, Iron had said, watching her from the box. He was new. He still thought the world matched the briefing. She knows, I'd said. I did not know how I knew. But I watched her look up at the high seat and find the provost's face and hold it for a moment, unhurried, and I knew that she knew exactly what was in the room with her, all of it, the champions and the seat and the doors and the cell beneath, and that she had decided to walk through it anyway, and the deciding was already done before she reached the center of the sand. Then the provost lifted her claw and the champion doors opened, and Haas came out onto the sand to kill her, and you know already how that went. I should tell you what came out of the dark, because the gallery has spent 9 years not looking at it, and I had spent 9 years grateful for that. It came out low, and it came out wrong. The 12 are tall, this thing was long, a reptilian apex the length of a transit hauler, scaled in plates the color of old iron gone to rust at the seams, with a head like a wedge of struck flint and a back ridged in spines that lay flat. When it was hunting and stood when it was about to kill, it did not roar. The ones that roar are warning you. This one made no sound at all as it poured out of the deep doors and onto the sand, and the 4 circling champions broke formation and pressed themselves against the pit wall, all their pride gone out of them at once, because they knew what I knew. Nothing in Varskold had ever shared the sand with the underfloor and walked back out. It went still. It had found the warm shapes against the wall and dismissed them. It had found the human standing alone in the middle of the lane, and it had not dismissed her. Maraquel did not back up. I have replayed this part of the recording more times than I will admit, looking for the trick, because there has to be a trick. A human cannot simply stand in front of that and live. There is no trick on the recording. She lowered herself, slowly, until she was crouched on her heels on the sand, bringing her plain ordinary face down level with the flint wedge head of the worst thing. Hold on, and she stayed there, hands loose on her knees, and she waited. The apex came forward, not in a rush, in the long flowing pour of a thing that has all the time in the world to do what it intends. The spines on its back were standing. I keyed my channel without meaning to and heard my own voice say very quietly, no to no one, the way you say it when you are about to watch something you cannot stop. It put its head in front of her, close. Close enough that the breath off it stirred the loose tunic at her shoulder. The spine stood the whole way down its back, and Maraquel lifted one open hand, not fast, not toward its eyes, just up, palm flat, the way you'd offer the back of your hand to a strange dog, and held it in the narrowing space between her face and its teeth. I heard Erin make a sound beside me. I think I made one too. The apex stopped. The spines on its back, which had been standing the whole length of it, went down, not all at once. From the head back, a slow falling wave, like grass when the wind drops, every plate settling, until the killing ridge was flat against its spine and the thing crouched in front of one small human looked. I have no better word, and I am a proctor of war. I do not reach for soft words. It looked like it had come home. It pressed its flint head into her open palm, the whole weight of it. A thing that had killed 9 handlers leaned the entire mass of its skull into the hand of an unarmed girl in a borrowed tunic, and she took the weight and she said, so softly that the gallery's pickups barely caught it, there you are, there you are. As if she had been the one waiting in the dark, as if it were the thing that had finally been found. The silence in the gallery was no longer the silence of people watching a demonstration. It was the silence of people who have just learned that the floor they are standing on is not the floor they thought it was. Up in the high seat, the provost had not moved. Her claw was still half raised from where she had signaled the doors. She had built her authority for 40 cycles on being the most dangerous thing in any room she entered, and she was watching that authority become untrue in front of 300 witnesses, and she did not yet have the wit to lower her hand. Dre. Iron's voice had gone to a whisper. What is she that it quiet, I said. But I did not say it to silence him. I said it because the human had said something else, and I wanted the record to have it clean. She had her other hand on the apex now, both palms flat against the iron jaw, and she was looking it over the way you look over something you have not seen in a long time, checking it for hurts. There were hurts. 9 years in a rock cell leave marks even on a thing like that. A cloudy seam over one eye, a foreleg that had set crooked from an old break no one had bothered to mend. She found the crooked leg with her fingers, and she made a small sound, not a word, the sound a person makes when they find an old injury on a friend, and the apex turned its enormous head and pressed the cloudy eye against her cheek and held it there. Easy, she said. I've got you. We're all right now. And the underfloor, the unnamed thing, the apex Varskold had spent 9 years too afraid to kill, closed its eyes and let an unarmed human hold its broken face against hers on the bleached sand of the culling pit, with 3 of the 12 still down where she dropped them, and 300 officers above unable to make a sound. I looked up at the gallery. I looked for the provost's face, because in 31 cycles I had learned to take my cues from it. Her face had nothing on it I could use. It had gone the gray pale of a thresh whose certainty has been taken out from under them all at once, and her half-raised claw was beginning, very slowly, to come down. But it is the middle of the matching I have to set down properly, the part between the second champion and the deep doors, because I rushed past it, and it is the part that decided everything. After Vol folded onto the sand with his knee ruined and his champion's pride Bleeding out of him in a sound none of us had heard before, the provost did not stop the match. She leaned to the rail and said one word into the pit channel, "Together," and the remaining 10 of the 12 came off the wall at once, not in turns. Together, the way the form was written to allow, precisely because no living thing could face 10 champions, Varsk hold at once, and the writing of it was itself the murder. They came across the lane from 3 sides, a closing iron fist of them, and I keyed the recorder to the wide pickups because whatever was about to happen, the Conquered would want it clean, and I did not expect any of us to want to watch it twice. I have watched it more times than I can count. She did not try to fight 10 champions. That is the thing the cadets get wrong when they tell it now, in the yard, with their hands moving. They tell it like a battle, like she struck them all down, and she could not have, no creature could. What she did was harder and stranger than fighting. She moved through them. She had found in the 2 she'd already dropped the one truth that mattered about a champion of Varsk hold, which is that a champion is built entirely for a foe that stands and meets it, and has had every instinct for a foe that does not stand and meet it, bred and beaten out of it across 400 cycles. So she did not stand and meet them. She went where the force was not. She let the first reaching champion's own lunge carry it past her into the second. She stepped inside the third's guard where its mass worked against it. She put a champion's grasping arm against another champion's chest and let them tangle their own great limbs. And when 2 of them finally closed on her, at once from either side, she dropped flat under the joint of them and let them seize each other in the space where she had been, and came up behind the both of them with her hands still open, untouched. It was not violence. I have proctored 400 years of violence into that pit, and I know its shape, and this was not its shape. This was a small creature walking through a storm of force by the simple refusal to be where the force was, and the storm spending itself on itself. Champion fouling champion, 300 kilos crashing into 300 kilos, while the thing they were all reaching for stood quiet in the eye of it and let them. By the time the provost called hold, there were 6 champions down or tangled or sitting stunned on the sand where they had run into each other, and 4 still up and circling, and not one of them had laid a claw on Mara Quell, and not one of them had taken a killing blow from her, because she had not struck a single one. She had only ever, the whole time, gotten out of the way. And that, I understood it slowly over the days after, the way you understand the worst things. That was what cracked the room. If she had struck them down, the gallery could have called it strength. And the gallery understands strength. The gallery's built for strength. But she had not struck them down. She had made the hold's finest champions defeat themselves by being calm, and there is no seat in the gallery from which that can be made to mean anything but that the whole law of the place, the 400-year law of dominance and pain, had just been walked through like an open door by someone who did not even seem to be in a hurry. That is when the provost reached for the deep doors, not because the human was winning, because the human was making the winning look like nothing, like a thing anyone might do if they simply stopped being afraid, and that was the one thing the hold could not allow to be true on the sand in front. Of 300 officers and the permanent log, the 4 standing champions had stopped circling by then. I had been watching them, because watching the beasts is my craft, and I saw the thing happen in them before it happened in the gallery. They had been ordered to kill her, and they had failed. And a champion that fails is supposed to feel shame, the hot driving shame that has been bred into them as a goad. I watched for the shame, and it was not there. What was there, in the set of their heads and the lowering of their ridges, was something the hold had never bred and could not name. The beginnings of deference. They had thrown everything they were at the small, calm thing in the center of the sand, and it had simply declined to be defeated gently, without contempt, and the oldest part of them, the part beneath 400 years of breeding, had begun to wonder if perhaps it had been pointing up the chain at the wrong thing its whole life. The provost saw it too. I am sure of it now. That is why she reached for the doors. She was not trying to kill the human anymore. She was trying to kill the thing the human was teaching her champions. And you cannot kill a thing like that with a monster from a cell, though it is the only tool a creature like the provost has ever owned. And so she reached for it, because reaching for the worst thing in the building was the only answer she had ever known to anything. And that, in the end, was what undid her. She brought the underfloor up into the light, and the underfloor took one look at the small human standing calm in the wreckage of the 12, and it knew the way the champions had begun to know, the way I was beginning to know in the cold of the proctor's box, exactly which thing on the sand was the strongest, and it was not the provost, and it had never been the provost, and it was not going to pretend otherwise for one more hour of its life. The provost did not let it stand. They never do. Cruelty that has been embarrassed does not retreat, it doubles because the only thing it knows how to do is press. Proctor Dre. Her voice came over the box channel steady again. She had found her certainty somewhere and dragged it back up. Log it. Cadet Quell has, mid-demonstration, suborned a hold asset. That is a breach of the discipline code. The demonstration is therefore void and a new one is convened. A pause while she made the cruelty sit up straight. Recall the asset to the underfloor. Cadet Quell will complete the original demonstration against the 12. All 12. Now, I want it understood that this was not a ruling. It was a murder written in the grammar of a ruling. The 4 standing champions had pressed themselves to the wall in front of the apex. The 3 Mara had dropped were only now dragging themselves up. She had no weapon and the floor was open. The provost was ordering us to wrench the one thing in the room that had chosen the human away from her, and then have 11 of our finest blooded killers finish what Hask had failed to start, and she was going to enter it in the log as discipline. The recall is a sound, not a button. We pipe a subtone down into the underfloor cell to bring the asset back to the chute, and I have the keying of it at the Proctor station. My claw was over the key. Iron was watching my claw. 300 officers were watching the sand, and on the sand, Mara Quell straightened up out of her crouch with one hand still resting flat between the apex's eyes, and she looked, for the first time since she had walked into the lane, up at the high seat, up at the provost, directly. She did not look afraid. She did not look angry, which would have been something the gallery could have used, could have called insolence, could have punished. She looked the way you look at a person you have caught lying about something small and sad. A little tired, a little disappointed, mildly, unbearably calm. "You should call your champions back," she said, to the provost, to the whole gallery. Her voice was not loud and the pickups carried it into every tier, not for me. For them, the provost's plates flared. "You will address the seat as, 'He's been alone for 9 years, Mara said over her, the way you'd talk over someone to finish a thought that mattered more than their dignity. Her hand was still flat on the apex's brow. "Down there in the rock. You fed him through a hole in the ceiling so nobody had to look at him. He had a broken leg the whole time and not one of you said it." She wasn't raising her voice. That was the terrible part. She was just saying the true things, one after another, in the gentle flat tone you use on someone who already knows they did wrong. "And now you want to send him back into the dark and have your boys beat a girl to death in front of children. Because you were wrong about something in front of people, and you'd rather kill than be wrong." She crouched again. She put her face next to the apex's cloudy eye. "Don't go back down," she told it quietly, just for it. But the pickups caught it, and the whole hold heard her name the thing for what she decided it was. "Stay close. You're not theirs anymore. I have run that pit for 31 cycles and I have never disobeyed a provost." My claw was still over the recall key. I want the record to show I hesitated. I want it to show that for 3 full seconds, I, Dre, Proctor of Varsk Hold, sat with the murder key under my claw and the order in my ear and a thing in my chest I had no designation for, watching a small human kneel in the open lane with both hands on a monster, telling it that it was not theirs. I took my claw off the key. "Proctor." Iron breathed. "Proctor, the order was unlawful," I said. My voice did not shake, which surprised me. No yield horn, no sanctioned asset. 12 against an unarmed intake under the equal intake mandate. I am the proctor of record and I am voiding the match. I keyed the channel, not the recall, the gallery address, the one that goes to every tier and into the permanent log at once. "All champions, stand down, the lane is closed. Cadet Quell, hold your position." For a moment nothing happened, and I thought I had thrown 31 cycles and my life after them for nothing. Then Hask, the first champion, 300 kilos of him, dragging one arm, looked at me in the box, and then he looked at the human and the apex in the middle of the lane. And then the finest blooded killer Varshold ever raised lowered his great horned head slowly, the way the apex had lowered its spines, and he sat down on the sand. He sat down, and one by one down the lane the other 10 did the same. I need to explain how the 12 are made so you understand what it meant that they sat. We take them from the blood pens before their eyes open. We raise them on dominance and pain, and the single unbroken law that there is always something above you, and the thing above you is Varsk Hold. And the holds will comes down the chain to you through the one who holds your leash. A champion does not sit because it is tired. A champion has had sitting beaten out of it since before it could see. When a champion lowers itself onto the sand in front of a creature it has not been ordered to obey, it is not resting. It is choosing a new top of the chain. 11 champions and the underfloor apex had just told 300 officers of Varsk Hold who the top of the chain was now, and she was crouched in the sand with a borrowed tunic and a broken-legged monster's head in her lap, and she had not asked any of them for it. The provost did the only thing left to her, which was to reach for force she still owned. "Pit guard," she said, and her voice had gone high and flat and fast. Cordon the lane. Restrain the cadet. Servos to the asset. The pit guard are not champions. They are the holds drilled enforcers. 2 squads of them, armored with shock lances and capture foam, and they came down the gallery stairs at a run because they had been raised on the same unbroken law, and the law still came from the high seat. Mara Quell heard them coming. She did not get up. She put her hand flat on the apex's brow, the way you'd ask a thing to wait, and she said one word, and I have it clean on the record because the pickups were wide open and the gallery was silent. Stay. The apex did not move. But every spine on its back stood up at once, the whole iron length of it, and the killing ridge rose, and it turned its flint head toward the stairs and looked at the running guards, and it made, for the first time since it came out of the dark, a sound, low, below hearing, almost. I felt it in the floor of the proctor's box. The 11 champions rose off the sand together, not toward the human, toward the stairs, ranging themselves between the guards and her in a line, and Hosk dragged his torn arm up and set himself at the front of it, and the message the room received required no translation in any tongue. Concord speaks. The guards stopped on the stairs. You have to understand what they were looking at. 12 of the deadliest creatures the hold had ever bred, plus the one thing the hold was too afraid to keep above ground. All of them turned outward in a wall around a crouching human girl who had not stood up, who had not raised her voice, who had said one quiet word. The capture foam was useless. The shock lances were useless. There was no order the provost could give that wall that the wall would now obey, because the wall had a new top of the chain and she was sitting in the sand asking the broken one if its legs still hurt. Easy. I heard her tell the apex. Its ridge was still up. Its low sound was still going through the floor. She had not even turned around to look at the guards. She trusted the wall she hadn't asked for to do its work. Easy now. Nobody's touching anybody. They're just frightened. Look it. There you are. The ridge came down. The low sound stopped. The apex turned its broken face back to her and put it back in her lap, and the 11 champions stood their line and did not break it. Up in the high seat, the provost of Varsk Hold sat with 2 squads of stalled guards on the stairs below her and 300 officers around her in the permanent log, running, and for the first time in the 40 cycles I had served under her, she did not know what to say. There was nothing above her on the chain anymore that would answer her call. She had spent her whole life being the most dangerous thing in the room, and there were now 13 more dangerous things in the room, and all 13 of them had chosen the one creature she had brought in to kill. I keyed the gallery channel one more time. My voice was steady. The record will show it was steady. The demonstration is concluded, I said. Let the log reflect. The human cadet survived an unsurvivable demonstration without striking a single killing blow. Let it further reflect that the hold's asset designated underfloor was found in unlawful condition, untreated, uncertified, held 9 years in breach of the welfare ordinance, and that this proctor is removing it from the provost's authority pending Concord review. I paused. I had never in my life enjoyed a silence the way I enjoyed that one. Cadet Quell, can you walk it out of here? She looked up at the box. At me, and the small plain human who had just unmade the order of Varsk Hold gave me a tired, ordinary nod, the kind you give a stranger who has held a door, and she said, yeah, he'll come. He just needs to know it's allowed. She stood up. The apex stood with her. The 11 champions turned and made a lane of themselves up the center of the sand toward the cadet doors, an honor lane, the kind we make for a provost on review day, and they made it for her without being told, and she walked up the middle of it with one hand resting on the iron flank of the worst thing the hold had ever owned, and the guards on the stairs pressed back against the rail to let her pass. I went down to the sand after the gallery had emptied that first day, because someone had to, and because I was the proctor of record and the asset was unrestrained and there was no precedent in any manual for what to do with a culling pit that had ended the way ours had ended. The lane was very quiet. The arc lamp still hung cold and blue over the bleached stone, and the doors at the far end stood open onto the dark of the deep cell, and in the middle of it all the small humans sat on the sand with the iron. Apex curled around her, and the 11 champions had not gone back to their pens. They had arranged themselves around the 2 of them in a loose ring, lying down the way I had seen the old Packard in the deep galleries show predators lying around a fire that no longer exists, and they watched me come down the proctor's stair with 11 sets of eyes and did not rise. I stopped at the edge of the lane. I am not a small thresh, and I have stood over the worst things this hold ever made and felt nothing but the cold professional steadiness of my craft, and I stood at the edge of that sand and could not make my feet carry me onto it. Mara looked up. She had her hand on the apex's brow. She saw me stopped at the edge, an old proctor who had run the murder she had just walked through, and she did not say any of the things she had every right to say. She just looked at me a moment, and then she said mildly, "You took your claw off the key. I voided the match, I said. It came out stiff, it was unlawful. I know what it was, she said. I was standing in it. And then, and this is the thing I have never been able to set down without my hand wanting to stop, she said, thank you. It mattered that somebody up there decided it was wrong out loud. He heard it too. She touched the apex's head. He's been a long time in a place where nobody ever said it was wrong out loud. I came onto the sand. I do not know what made my feet move. I think it was the simple human courtesy of being thanked, which the gallery does not deal in, which I had not been shown in 31 cycles of running the pit. I came across the bleached stone, and the 11 champions watched me come and did not rise, and I stopped a respectful distance from the apex, and it opened its cloudy eye and took my measure and decided I was not a thing to stand. Up 4 and closed it again, and that was how I came to be. At the age I was, the second creature in Varskhold, the underfloor, would suffer near it. It will not go back into the cell, I said. It was not a question. I had spent the afternoon understanding it was not a question. No, Mara said. It won't. Then I have a great deal of logging to do, I said, and you have nowhere to keep a thing that size that the provost cannot reach, and the provost is going to spend every hour of the next 40 days finding a lawful way to put it back in the dark, and you with it. I looked at the apex, and at the 11, and at the small human in the middle of them. I have run this pit for 31 cycles, cadet. I know how this place answers a thing that embarrasses it. Does not forgive, it waits. She nodded slowly. She did not seem surprised or afraid, and I was coming to understand that I would never once see her afraid, and that this was not bravado but a simpler and stranger thing, an actual and complete absence, as if the part of her that other creatures kept their fear in had been given over to something else entirely. Then we'll wait better than it does, she said. Where I'm from, there's a saying about that too. She scratched the apex's brow. The wolf isn't patient because it isn't hungry. It's patient because it knows it's going to eat. She looked up at the empty high seat, the provost's seat, dark now under the cold lamps. She's going to spend 40 days waiting to take it all back. And every one of those 40 days, this is going to be true. She put both her hands flat on the iron head in her lap. It's already true. She can't make it unhappen. She can only decide how many witnesses there are when she finds out she can't. That's the only choice she's got left, and she doesn't know it yet. I logged the asset's disposition as stable and unrestrained and remanded, pending review, to the care of the cadet to whom it would answer, and I dated it, and I signed it as proctor of record, and that signature, that one, not the murder I had signed the day before, is the one I would keep if the Concord let me keep only one thing from 31 cycles in that bowl of cold stone. I signed that a monster had chosen a human, and that I had written it down and made it part of the permanent and unalterable record of Varskhold, where no provost could reach in and take it out, and then I climbed the proctor's stair out of the pit. And behind me the 11 champions lay back down in their ring around the human and the apex in the long blue night, and the worst room in the reach kept watch over the one creature in it that had never been afraid. The review came, because I had put the words Concord Review into a permanent log in front of 300 witnesses, and once a thing is in the permanent log, even a provost cannot reach in and take it out. It took 40 days. In those 40 days, I learned more about the small human than her roster file had ever held. And most of what I learned by watching, because Mara Quell was not a talker. She had come to Varskhold the way 112 humans had come that cycle, under the equal intake, mandate the Concord had forced on the war academies after first contact, the mandate every provost in the Concord had spent 2 years trying to gut. The other 111 had been processed into the support tracks, the quartermaster lines, the medical corps, the places the hold put intake it did not respect. Mara had asked for the combat track. The provost had granted it personally, and I understood now that she had granted it the way you grant a small animal access to a high ledge, so that the fall could be called the animal's own choice. She had not fallen. She had walked out of the pit with a monster, and the monster would not be parted from her, and so the hold had the problem of what to do with both of them, while the Concord chewed on the review. They could not put the apex back in the rock. I would not key the recall, and Mara would not leave its side, and after the third day the provost stopped ordering it, because each time she ordered it, the 11 champions drifted toward the humans' quarters and ranged themselves outside the door, and a provost cannot be seen to give an order the whole hold watches go unobeyed. So the apex stayed above ground in the empty east drill hall, and Mara stayed with it. And I, because someone of rank had to be the proctor of record for an asset under review, and because no one else would go near it, spent 40 days in that drill hall taking my notes. I will tell you the thing I did not expect. The thing was gentle with her, and it was gentle the way only an enormous dangerous thing can be, with a care that knows exactly its own weight. It learned the layout of the hall so it would not knock things onto her. When she slept, It lay curled the long iron length of itself around the cot, with its flint head laid across the foot of it, and the spines on its back stayed flat all night. And once when a maintenance crew came in too loud at the far door, the apex came off the floor in a single pour of motion and put itself between them and the sleeping human before any of us had finished flinching. And then when she stirred and said easy without even opening her eyes, it stopped mid-killing, settled back and lowered its ridge, and went back to the foot of the cot. The mender we finally found brave enough to set the crooked leg told me afterward that he had never had a patient hold so still. Mara held the apex's head in her two hands the whole time with her face down against the cloudy eye, talking to it low and steady about nothing, about a road on a world I have never seen, about a horse her grandfather had kept, about how the worst ones to gentle were always the ones who'd been left alone too long with their hurts, that they came around slower but they came around deeper. The apex held still for the mender's saw, and the brace and the long bad part where the bone was reset held still and shaking with its claws dug into the drill hall floor and its eye pressed to her cheek, because she had told it to, and because she was there. When it was done, she sat with her forehead against its brow for a long while, and neither of them moved, and I wrote in my notes, in the cold proctor's hand I have used for 31 cycles, that the asset's disposition was stable. And then I sat in the dark of the drill hall and could not for some time write anything else. The cadets started coming around the second week. Younger ones, the human intake from the support tracks, and a few thresh cadets too, drifting to the drill hall door at the change of watch the way the young drift toward anything the old ones are afraid of. Mara let them in a few at a time. She made them sit down at the far end of the hall and be still, and let the apex come to them in its own time. And she gave them the same instruction every time, the only doctrine she ever taught at Varskold. 4 flat words she said so often, the cadets began saying them to each other across the yard. Quiet hands, slow heart. That was all of it. Quiet hands, slow heart. The thresh cadets, who had been raised on the unbroken law of dominance and pain, turned it into something the way young soldiers turn everything into something. They started saying it before exams, before the sparring pit, before anything that frightened them, the way I am told human soldiers once muttered prayers. Quiet hands, slow heart. By the 4th week, there was not a cadet in Varsk hold under the age of 20 who could not tell you that the way you faced the worst thing in the room was not with a weapon and not with a roar, but with your hands open and your heart slow, the way the small human had faced the underfloor and lived. The champions never left her. That was the other thing the review had to reckon with. The 12, the hold standing line, would no longer parade for the high seat. They paraded for her. They followed her across the yard in a loose wedge, 11 of them and the long iron apex, and the whole of Varsk hold rearranged itself around the simple fact of where Mara Quell was walking, the prey tracks and the predator tracks all bending the same way, and she walked through the middle of it with her hands in the pockets of a tunic that still didn't fit mildly the way you walk to breakfast. I have to tell about the night the raiders came, because the provost would say later that the pack only stood for Mara because no one had ever tested it. And the night the raiders came is the answer to that, written in a thing more permanent than any log. It was the 33rd day of the review. Varsk hold sits at the edge of the reach, the last hard point before the unclaimed dark. And the unclaimed dark is full of crews who make their living off the edges of the Concord. Slavers, mostly, and the worse than slavers who supply them. And Varsk hold in the middle of a leadership review with its provost half relieved and its discipline in question was a softer target than it had been in 400 cycles, and the dark has a way of smelling that. They came in low 3 hulls over the rendering yards with their drives masked and their intent plain. Not the hold's armory, which is buried and guarded, but the intake barracks, the support tracks, the unblooded, the cadets, the soft cargo. They came for the children, because children sell, and because a hold in disarray would be slow to notice and slower to answer. I was in the drill hall when the perimeter alarm finally caught up to what was already happening. Mara was asleep on the cot. The apex was curled around it. The champions were out in the yard. And the first thing I knew of the raid was not the alarm, it was the apex coming, off the floor. It came up before the alarm sounded. I want that understood. It was on its feet, and its ridge was standing, and its flint head was turned toward the east wall a full breath before the perimeter horns began. Because a thing bred and built as that thing was built does not need a horn to tell it that killers have entered its range. Mara woke the way she did everything, without panic, sitting up into the dark with the apex already over her. She put her hand on its flank and felt the ridge standing and the low sound going through the floor, and she did not tell it easy. That is the part the provost never understood. There was a night for easy, and there was this night, and Mara Quell knew the difference in her sleep. Where, she said to it. Just that, where. And the apex turned its head toward the east wall, toward the barracks, toward the children, and Mara Quell stood up off the cot in a tunic that didn't fit and said the other thing she knew how to say, the thing she had never once said in 40 days, and the apex's ridge came up the last of the way, and the champions in the yard came around toward the drill hall door as one because they had heard it through the walls. "Go," she said. "Bring them home. All of them. Go. I have proctored violence for 31 cycles, and I have never seen its like, and I never will again." The 11 champions did not run to the barracks. They ran to the raiders the long way, around, to put themselves between the soft cargo and the hulls, and the apex went through the east wall, through it, an old wall of cut stone 2 spans thick. It went through it the way you go through a curtain, and into the rendering yard where the first raiding crew had grounded and were moving up toward the intake doors in their boarding armor with their nets and their goads, expecting a hold too busy with its own politics to lift its head. The hold lifted its head. The hold's head was an iron apex, the length of a transit hauler that 9 years in the dark had filled with a patience for exactly this, and it came into the rendering yard silent, with its ridge up, and it did not herd them, and it did not warn them, and it did not give them the chance to put down their goads. I will not set down the particulars. The niche of my craft is the aftermath, not the act, and the aftermath was enough. By the time I reached the yard with the pit guard behind me, the pit guard, who answered now to the proctor's box and not the high seat, the first crew was down and would not rise, and the apex was already pouring up the ramp of the second hull, and the champions had the third crew pinned against the yard wall in a wall of their own, 11 sets of jaws, and not one of them closing, holding, waiting, because somewhere behind them in the dark a small human had not yet said the word that would let them. She came up through the broken wall at a walk. She had a perimeter lamp in one hand and nothing else, and she crossed the rendering yard through the wreck of the first crew without looking down at it, and she came up to the third crew pinned and shaking against the wall in the ring of champion teeth. And she lifted the lamp and looked them over, the raiders, the men who had come in the dark to take children, and her plain ordinary face had nothing on it I could use. "You came for the young ones," she said. Not a question. She had seen the nets. The crew leader, a hard, scarred thing from somewhere down the reach, found his voice from inside the ring of teeth. "Call them off," he said. "Call them off, we surrender. We surrender to the hold." "You don't surrender to the hold," Mara said. "The hold's not what's holding you." She crouched down, the lamp on the stones, level with him, the way she got level with everything. "They're holding you because I haven't told them not to. You understand the difference? There's no wall around you tonight, but the one I'm allowing. So you're going to tell me how many crews, and how many hulls, and whether there's a fourth one out in the dark waiting to see if this works. And you're going to tell me now, while I'm still in the mood to let them keep holding instead of letting them finish." He told her. He told her everything, fast, all of it. A fourth hull standing off in the dark, and a fence 2 systems over, and a list of which holds they'd already hit, and the pit guard recorded every word of it into the permanent log, and it was that recording. The confession of a slaver crew leader spilled out from inside a ring of champion teeth to a calm human with a borrowed lamp that broke the ring the slavers ran clear across the reach 3 weeks later, when the Concorde moved on the fence. But that is another record. On the night itself, when he had told her all of it and his voice had run out, Mara Quell stood up and picked up her lamp and looked at the 11 champions holding the crew against the wall, and she did not tell them to finish. "Hold them for the guard," she said. "All of them alive. The Concorde wants them able to talk." She turned to go find the children, and then she stopped and looked back at the crew leader one more time and said the only hard thing I ever heard her say, in the same flat, gentle voice she used for everything, which was somehow worse than if she had shouted it. "You came to a hold in the middle of the night to put children in nets. There's a wall of teeth around you right now that wants to make an end of you, and the only reason it won't is that I've decided you're more used to those children alive and talking than you are dead on these stones. That's the only reason. Sit with that on the way to wherever they send you. Every breath you take after tonight, a human you came to rob is the reason you're taking it." Then she went to find the children, and the apex came back out of the second hull and fell in at her shoulder, and the 11 champions held the third crew against the wall all the rest of the night without once closing their jaws, because she had told them alive, and alive it was, because the wall around her did exactly and only what she said. Not one cadet was taken. Not one child of Varskold, human or Thresh, went into the dark that night. The pack that the provost had sworn would run when the enemy came had gone through a stone wall and 3 boarding crews and stood a line in rendering yard around the soft cargo of the hold, and had killed only what it had to and held the rest gentle, all of it, on the word of a small human who had been at Varsk 40 days and never raised her voice. I logged it. I logged every part of it. And when I had finished logging it, I sat a long while in the wreck of the rendering yard in the cold before dawn, an old proctor of a school for fear, and I understood that I had spent 31 cycles guarding the wrong thing, and that the strongest defense Varsk Hold had ever raised had been raised by the one creature in it who was not afraid of anything, and had asked nothing in return but quiet hands and a slow heart. The morning after the raid, the hold was different, and the difference was the thing the provost could not survive, though it took the review to finish her. The cadets came to the rendering yard at first light to see what the alarms had been, and they found the broken east wall, and the 3 grounded hulls being stripped by the Concorde's forensic crew, and the slaver crews in capture restraint waiting for transport, and they found, lying along the yard wall in the cold morning light with their work done, the 11 champions and the iron apex, and the small human asleep against the apex's flank with a perimeter lamp gone dark beside her hand. The cadets had been told, all their lives, what the 12 were for. They had been told the 12 were the hold's instrument, the high seat's reach, the thing that came down the chain to enforce the unbroken law, and they stood in the rendering yard at first light and looked at the truth of it, which was that the hold's instrument had spent the night standing a wall around them, around the soft cargo, around the unblooded intake the provost had been ready to throw to the dark of her own politics, and that it had done it on the word of one of their own. Word of a thing like that does not move through a hold the way an order moves. It moves faster, and it moves in a way no seat can recall. By midday, there was not a cadet at Varsk who did not know that the raiders had come for them in the night and that a human in a pack had stood the line, and by the evening watched the support track intake. The 111 humans, the hold had processed into the quartermaster lines and the medical corps and the places it did not respect, had begun, quietly, without anyone ordering it, to drift toward the east drill hall, the way Mara's cadets had been drifting for weeks, except now they did not come to see the monster. They came to stand near the human who had not let them be taken. I watched the provost watch it happen. I was required to attend her those days as proctor of record for the asset under review, and so I stood in her tier room with the duty reports while she stood at the long window that looks down over the yard, and I watched her watch 111 humans she had meant to keep beneath the hold's notice, gather in the open around the one who had become, in a single night, the thing the whole hold's young looked to. She did not say anything for a long while. Then she said, without turning from the window, she let 3 crews live. She did, I said. She had the asset into the 12 in a rendering yard with 3 boarding crews caught flat, and she let 2 of them live and took the 3rd for questioning. The provost's voice was flat. A champion of this hold would have finished them. The law would have finished them. She let them live and sent them to the Concorde to talk. She turned from the window, and her plates had the gray cast I had seen on her face, in the pit, the cast of a creature whose certainty is failing, and who does not yet have another one to put in its place. Why does that frighten me more than if she'd killed them all, Dre? Tell me, since you've decided you understand her. Why is mercy from a thing that's strong the most frightening part of any of it? I had not decided I understood her, but I had spent 31 cycles learning to read what stood on the sand, and I had learned a thing about Maraquel in 40 days, and so I told the provost the truth, which I do not think she had ever once been told in that room. Because killing them would have been the law, I said, and the law you understand. A thing that kills, because the law says kill is a thing you can command if you hold the law. But she didn't kill them, and she didn't spare them out of weakness either. She spared them because the children were better served by it, and she worked that out for herself in a yard full of dead men, with a lamp in her hand and not one of us telling her what the law required. That's the part. She doesn't need the law. She's got something the law was always just a poor copy of, and she carries it around with her wherever she walks, and the 12 smelled it on her in the pit before any of us understood what it was. I set the duty reports on her table. You've spent 40 cycles being the thing the law points at. And a small human walked in and showed every cadet in the hold that the law was never the strongest thing in the room. It was only ever the most afraid thing, dressed up to look strong. You can't command your way out of that. You can only decide how many of them are watching when it finishes. The provost looked at me for a long moment. I had served under her for 40 cycles, and I had never once spoken to her like that, and I think she understood in that moment that she had lost me too, that the proctor of record, the keeper of the permanent log, the one creature whose signature could make her cruelty lawful, had taken his claw off the key for good. She did not relieve me. I think she knew that relieving me would only put it in the log. She turned back to the window and looked down at the gathering in the yard, the 111 and the cadets and the pack and the small human moving among them, and she said very quietly, the last honest thing I ever heard her say, I should have set the leg, she said, 9 years ago. I had the welfare ordinance and a mender in a quiet afternoon, and I left it in the rock with a broken leg because a broken thing in a cell is easier to threaten the champions with than a sound one. I made it into the worst thing in the hold on purpose, Dre, so I'd have something to point at. She was quiet, and she walked down into the pit and set it right in front of 300 witnesses. And now it lies in my yard and watches me cross it like I'm not worth standing up for. I made the monster. She made it whole. And the whole hold watched her do the thing I could have done any day for 9 years and chose not to. Her claw rested on the windowsill. That's what's in the log now. That's what the review will read. Not that I lost. That I could have done it kindly any time, and I chose cruelty, and a stranger chose better in an afternoon. I did not answer her. There was no answer to give that would not have been a cruelty of my own. And I was learning, late, from a small human in an oversized tunic, that there is a difference between the true thing and the cruel thing, even when they are the same words, and that the difference is whether you say it to wound or whether you simply let it be true. So I let it be true, and I left her at the window, and I went down to the yard where the living things were. The Concord Review convened on the 40th day in the gallery above the pit, because there was no room in Varsk hold large enough and no provost willing to admit there might need to be. 3 Concord adjudicators came, a Drekken, a robed cell, and an old gray thresh from a hold across the reach who had run pits of her own and knew exactly what a culling demonstration was. They sat in the high seat the provost usually held, which the provost had to be seen to offer, and which I do not think she had ever once imagined offering. She sat below them on the proctor's tier, beside me. I had been called as the proctor of record. She had been called as the officer whose order I had voided, and the distance between those two things had grown over 40 days into something everyone in the gallery could see and no one would name. They ran the recording first, the whole of it on the big pit display, with 300 officers watching it a second time, and the adjudicators watching it a first. Hosk's lunge and his fall, Vol's knee, the deep doors opening, the apex pouring out of the dark, and the spines going down like grass, and the flint head pressing into a small open hand. There you are. The 11 champions sitting on the sand, the guards stalling on the stairs, stay, and the honor lane, and the human walking out of the pit with the worst thing the hold ever owned at her shoulder. When it ended, the gallery was silent the way it had been silent the day it happened. The old gray thresh adjudicator let the silence sit. Then she leaned forward and addressed not me, not the provost, but Mara Quell, who stood alone on the sand below. They had asked her to stand where she had stood that day, and the apex lay along the foot of the kill lane behind her with its mended legs stretched out and its ridge flat, and the 11 champions stood ranged at the lane's mouth, and not one creature in that pit was afraid except the officers in the seats. Cadet, the adjudicator said, the seat that convened your demonstration has entered a charge. It says you suborned a hold asset and breached the discipline code. Before we rule, the review will hear you. Why did the asset choose you? Mara Quell looked up at the high seat. She thought about it. She was never quick to answer, and she did not hurry now, with the whole Concord waiting. I didn't do anything to it, she said. That's the part nobody up there can stand. I didn't trick it or train it or tame it. I just didn't lie to it. She turned a little and put her hand back on the iron flank behind her, and the apex's eye opened and found her. Everything in this place had been lying to it for 9 years, telling it with a wall and a chute and a locked door that it was a weapon, that it was the worst thing here, that the only thing it was for was killing. And it believed them, because what else does a thing have to go on but how it's treated? She looked back up. I crouched down so I wasn't taller than it, and I held my hand still, and I let it smell that I wasn't afraid and I wasn't going to hurt it. And that was the whole trick. That was all of it. It didn't choose me. It just finally met something that told it the truth about itself, and it would have chosen anybody who did that. The flat, gentle, terrible honesty she'd used on the provost. It's a shame it had to be a stranger. You had 9 years. The old threshed adjudicator sat back. The Drekken made a low sound. And the provost of Varsk hold, beside me, made the mistake she had been building toward for 40 days. The mistake of a creature that knows only how to press. She stood. The cadet described sentiment, she said, into the review, claws laced, certainty dragged up one last time. I will describe the institution. Varsk hold has bred champions for 400 cycles by one law. There is always something above you. That law has held the line of the Concord through 9 wars. This human's method produces affection. It does not produce soldiers. Affection does not hold a line. She turned the gray plates of her face toward Mara and let the contempt show, because she had decided contempt was the high ground. When the enemy comes, cadet, your monsters will not stand in a wall around you because you set a leg. They will run, and the hold's law will be all that's left. Mara Quell looked at her for a moment. Then she did the thing that ended it. She did not argue. She turned around. With her back to the high seat and the contempt and the whole architecture of dominance and pain, and she crouched down in front of the apex that had killed 9 handlers, and she said quietly, not even loudly enough for the pickups to have caught it if the gallery had not gone so silent, "Show them what frightened looks like." And the apex, the underfloor, the unnamed thing, 400 cycles worth of the hold's best work in fear-made flesh, got up off the sand. It rose to its full iron length, and the killing ridge came up the whole way down its back, and it turned its flint head toward the high seat where the provost stood. And it took one slow-flowing step toward her, and it made the low sound I had felt in the floor of the box, the one below hearing, and the 11 champions came up off their haunches at the lane's mouth as one, and turned the same way, and the provost of Varsk Hold, who had spent 40 cycles being the most dangerous thing in every room, took a step back into the high seat and threw up one claw in front of her face. Mara let it sit exactly 1 second, long enough for 300 officers to see it, long enough for the permanent log. "Easy," she said. "Easy now. Stay close." The ridge went down. The apex turned and poured itself back along the kill lane and laid its mended leg out and put its head back down in the sand at her feet, and the 11 champions sat. And Mara Quell stood up and brushed the sand off her knees and looked up at the high seat where the provost still had one claw raised in front of her face in front of the entire concord. "It stands in a wall around me," Mara said mildly, "because I'm not afraid of it. Yours run from you because they are. That's the difference. That's the whole difference. You just watched it." She put her hands back in her pockets. "When the enemy comes, mine will stand. You should hope yours do half as well." Before the adjudicators ruled, they called witnesses, because a review of the Concord is a thorough thing, and the night of the raid was in the log now, and the log demanded reckoning. They called Iron first, my under-proctor, raised on the same unbroken law as every thresh in the hold, who had stood beside me in the box and stopped breathing through his gills when the apex lowered its ridge. He stood on the sand where Mara had stood, and the old gray adjudicator asked him what he had seen. And Erin, who I had thought would say the careful nothing a young officer says to survive a review, looked up at the high seat where his provost sat below the adjudicators, and then he looked at Mara standing quiet with her hand on the apex, and he chose the way I had chosen at the key, the way the champions had chosen on the sand. "I saw the 12 sit down," Iron said. "I have been at this hold since before my eyes cleared, and I have never seen a champion sit down on the sand of its own will. And I saw 11 of them do it in one afternoon for a human who never raised her hand. And I saw the asset come out of 9 years in the dark and put its head in her palm." He swallowed. "And on the night of the raid, I was on the east perimeter. I saw the wall come down. I saw what came through it. I had been taught my whole life that the 12 were the high seat's reach, that they answered the chain, that without the chain they would turn on us. And I watched them stand a line around the barracks in the dark with their jaws open, and not one of them close on a cadet, because she had told them alive, and I understood that everything I had been taught about why they obey was a lie. They never obeyed the chain. They obeyed fear, and the day something stronger than fear walked into the pit, the fear stopped mattering, and the chain with it." He looked at the provost then, directly, a young officer at the start of his service, looking at the most dangerous creature he had ever known. "We were never holding their leash, Provost. We were only ever the thing they were most afraid of. She showed us that. I'd rather know it." They called the mender next, the one who had set the leg, and he testified to 9 years of untreated injury on a sentient asset and to the welfare ordinance and to the simple fact that a thing held in pain in the dark is held there by choice, the choice of whoever holds the key. They called 2 of the support track humans who had been in the barracks the night of the raid, and they testified plainly, in the flat, unimpressed human way that I had come to know from Mara, that they had been sleeping when the killers came, and that they had woken to find a wall of teeth between themselves and the dark, and that the wall had been put there by one of their own, and that they were alive to give testimony because of it. They called the pit guard captain, who testified that her squads had answered the proctor's box and not the high seat on the day of the demonstration, and when the adjudicator asked her why, she said, without apology, that her squads had stopped on the stairs because there was a wall of champions between them and a crouching human, and they were not fools, and that they had answered the box afterward because the box had given the only lawful order in the room that day, and a guard that cannot tell a lawful order from an unlawful one is no guard at all. And then last, they called me the proctor of record. I stood on the sand of my own pit, the bowl of cold stone I had run for 31 cycles, and I looked up at the gallery I had spent my life serving, and the old gray thresh adjudicator, who had run pits of her own and knew exactly what I was, asked me one question. "Proctor Dre," she said, You signed the demonstration. 12 against 1, no weapons, no yield horn. Your claw is on the form. Why did you sign it and why did you void it? I had known the question would come. I had not known until I stood there that I would answer it honestly, but I found that 40 days near a small human who never once lied to the thing she loved had worked something loose in me, and so I told the truth into the permanent log of Varsk Hold, where it remains. I signed it because I was afraid of the provost, I said. That is the whole reason. There is no better one. I have run this pit for 31 cycles, and I have signed a great many cruel things because the high seat told me to, and I was afraid, and I told myself each time that the fear was duty, and it was not duty, it was only fear, dressed up the way the law in this place is dressed up, to look like something a creature could be proud to serve. The gallery was silent. I had served most of them. They had never heard me say a true thing in my life, and I avoided it because a small human stood on this sand and was not afraid of anything in the room, not the 12 and not the underfloor and not the high seat. And she made me see in one afternoon that I had built my whole life out of being a little less frightened than the creature below me, and a little more frightened than the creature above. That is all the chain ever was. She walked through it like it wasn't there, because for her it wasn't, and once I had seen a thing walk through it, I could not pretend any longer that it was a wall. So I took my claw off the key. I looked at Mara, standing quiet with her hand on the apex. I am an old thresh. I have nothing to gain by saying this, and a seat to lose by it. The cadet did not suborn an asset. The cadet did the one thing no one in the 400-year history of this hold ever thought to do. She refused to be afraid, and she refused to make anything else afraid, and the strongest creatures we ever bred recognized it for what it was before any of us in the seats did, because they had spent their whole lives being afraid, and they knew the absence of it when it finally walked onto their sand. I straightened an old proctor in a place that had stopped being a school for fear the moment she walked into it. That is my testimony. The form has my claw on it. So does the voiding. I would sign the voiding again. The old gray thresh adjudicator ruled before the provost had lowered her claw. I will give the ruling the way it went into the permanent log, because I read it into the log myself and I have it by heart. The charge against Cadet Mara Quell was dismissed in full. A cadet cannot suborn an asset by being the first creature in 9 years to treat it lawfully. The demonstration was struck from the record as an unsanctioned killing convened to circumvent the equal intake mandate, and the seat that convened it was found in breach of the welfare ordinance on 9 separate counts, one for each year the apex had been held untreated in the rock. The provost of Varsk Hold was relieved of her seat pending a Concord disciplinary review of her own and escorted from the gallery, not by the pit guard, who would not move to it, but by 2 of the Drekken adjudicator's own staff. She walked out past the kill lane on her way to the doors. The apex did not lift its head. It only opened the cloudy eye and watched her go the whole length of the lane. The way a thing watches something it has decided is no longer worth the trouble of standing for, and that, more than the wall, more than the low sound, more than anything, was what took the last of her bearing as she went. The most dangerous thing she had ever owned had looked at her and found her beneath notice. The apex was not returned to anyone's authority. The old adjudicator wrote it into the ruling in plain words. The asset designated underfloor is remanded to the care of Cadet Mara Quell, who is the only individual to whom it will safely answer for the natural remainder of its life. They struck the designation from the rolls. They did not give it a new one. Mara was asked for the record what she would call it, and she thought about it the slow way she thought about everything, with her hand on its flank, and she said she'd call it whatever it wanted to be called, and that they had a while to figure it out, the 2 of them, now that nobody was in a hurry to put it back in the dark. It lived 11 more cycles. I want that in the record too, because the provost had been so certain it would end in killing, and it did not end in killing. It lived 11 cycles in the open air of Varsk Hold with its legs set straight and its eye clouded but its ridge flat, and it died old, in the East Drill Hall, with its iron head in Mara Quell's lap and her hands quiet on its brow, the way she had held it the first day. I was there. By then I was no longer a proctor of the pit. There was no pit. The Concord closed the culling lane after Varsk and never reopened it. But I was there because over 11 cycles the small human had become the nearest thing to a friend a creature like me is allowed, and she had sent for me. She told it the same things at the end she had told it at the beginning. There you are. Easy. We're all right now. Stay close. And the great iron length of it let out one long breath and was still, and the 11 champions, old themselves by then, lay down around the drill hall in a wall the way they had on the sand, and kept it through the night. The thing they call the Quell method is taught in 9 war academies across the Reach now, though Mara never wrote it down and never would, and most of what passes for the method is just the 4 words the cadets carried out of that drill hall. Quiet hands, slow heart. The version they teach has diagrams and stages and a certification track. And Mara laughed when she first saw the manual, which was the only time in 11 cycles I heard her laugh at the hold, because the manual is 40 pages long and the whole of what she knew fits in. Those 4 words and one more thing the manuals leave out, the thing she said to me once in the drill hall when I asked her, finally, after all those cycles, how a small soft creature from a soft green world had walked into the worst room I know and unmade it without raising her voice. She was quiet a while. The apex was asleep at her feet. The champions were drilling the new intake out in the yard gently, the way they drilled now. Everything in here learned that the strongest thing in the room is the one everybody's afraid of, she said. That's your whole law. Top of the chain is whoever scares the rest. She scratched the apex's brow with 2 fingers and it sighed in its sleep. Where I'm from, we worked it out the other way around a long time ago. The strongest thing in the room is the one that doesn't have to be afraid. And the only way to stop being afraid of a thing is to stop making it afraid of you. She looked over at me, mild, plain, ordinary, the small human who had 13 of the deadliest creatures in the Concord lying in a wall around her, and did not appear to have noticed. You can't frighten your way to that. You spent 400 years trying. It was never going to work. She shrugged and put her hand back on the sleeping iron head. Quiet hands, slow heart, that's all it ever was. You just had to stop being the scariest thing in the room long enough to find out you didn't need to be. I have run that pit for 31 cycles. I have logged 10,000 recruits and watched the fear go one way, from the sand to the gallery, world without end. I am an old thresh now, and I have written a great many true things into the permanent log of Varsk Hold, and this is the truest one, the one I would have the Concord remember when the hold and the pit and the provost and I are all struck from the rolls and forgotten. The strongest thing that ever stood on that sand was a small, plain human who never raised her hand, and the worst monster we ever bred knelt down and put its broken head in her palm, and she looked at the cruelest room in the reach and said, "Easy. Stay close. You're not theirs anymore." And it wasn't. None of us were after that. We just hadn't known there was anything else to be.